The world snapped into focus with a sting. Not a metaphorical one, but a real, sharp physical pain on my back that jolted me out of a disorienting haze. I coughed, my eyes watering, and found myself staring into the stern, handsome face of a man I had hoped never to see again. Liam Vance. He was young, his features sharp and defined, but his expression was a mask of chilly condescension. At that moment, the last fragments of a nightmare, a lifetime of neglect and humiliation, collided with the terrifying reality of the present. I was 19 again. This was the day. The day I had willingly walked into my own ruin. "All right then, Alara," Liam said, his voice firm and devoid of warmth. "Today you'll transfer your job to Chloe. Once the paperwork is done, we'll go get the marriage certificate. After all, you don't have much education and that factory job doesn't suit you. From now on, just stay at home. My salary is enough for both of us." He spoke as if he were bestowing a great honor upon me. "Come on, Alara. What are you standing around for?" Before I could process the sheer audacity of his plan, my stepmother, Diana, chimed in with a voice like cloying syrup. "Hurry to the mechanical factory and get it taken care of." She beamed at Liam, a bright, false smile that didn't reach her calculating eyes. "Don't worry, Liam. Our family won't ask for a bride price. Our Alara is diligent. Once she marries into the Vance family, she'll definitely live a good life with you." She then turned that predatory smile on me, laughing lightly as she gave my back another hard, familiar slap. "Alara, Liam is a permanent worker at the factory. For him to choose you is like me burning incense for blessings." That second slap, the sting of it, was the final key. It wasn't a dream. The sharp pain shooting through my hand where my nails were digging into my palm confirmed it. This was real. I had been reborn. I had returned to the very precipice of my destruction. Memories of another life, a life of silent suffering, flooded me. I saw myself, a hollow-eyed ghost in the Vance household, cooking, cleaning, and caring for Liam's ailing mother while he and his beloved stepsister, Chloe, exchanged secret smiles and intimate glances behind my back. I saw the job my father died for, the iron rice bowl he'd secured for me with his sacrifice, being worn by Chloe, who flaunted her position and looked down on me. I saw the house my parents left me, taken over by Diana and my worthless stepbrother, Mark, who threw my belongings into the street without a shred of remorse. The hatred of that past life was a physical thing, a fire burning in my chest and gut so intense I thought it might consume me. "You only got this job because your father was a martyr." Liam's cold voice cut through my reverie, echoing the words I remembered from a lifetime ago. "Otherwise, with your level of schooling, how could you possibly have entered the factory? I'm busy with work and Chloe is still young. After we're married, you'll stay home and take care of my mother." He spoke of Chloe over and over, considering everything from her perspective. Reborn into this life? Why should I still hand my job over to him? The question screamed in my mind. Suddenly, I couldn't bear Diana's touch. I violently shoved her hand away and stood up, my legs trembling not with fear, but with a surge of long-forgotten defiance. "I'm not getting married." The air in the room instantly froze. The ticking of the old clock on the wall became deafening. Liam's handsome face swung toward me, his eyes sharp as blades, wide with disbelief. The cocky smile on Diana's lips solidified, as if someone had gripped her throat. I met his gaze, my own now calm and steady. "The job is mine. No one can take it. It's the iron rice bowl my father left me. Why should I give it away for nothing?" I paused, letting the words hang in the stunned silence. "If you want it, then pay for it." Liam's expression darkened, the condescension melting into pure fury. He shot to his feet, the legs of his chair screeching harshly across the cement floor. "Alara Reed, what do you mean? Didn't we agree that after finishing the paperwork today, we'd get the marriage certificate?" His voice was low, carrying a suppressed rage, his brows tightly furrowed as if I were some incomprehensible monster. "You're playing with us?" Diana finally reacted, screeching like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. "You wretched girl! What nonsense are you spouting?" She rushed at me, her hand raised to strike again. But this time I was ready. I sidestepped her easily, my gaze cold enough to freeze hell. "Didn't I make myself clear? The marriage was your decision, and the job was what you said would be given to Chloe. How can you go back on your word?" Diana jabbed her finger at my nose, her face contorted with anger. "Liam is counting on that job for Chloe. How could you do this?" Her words were like a key unlocking the final ugly truth of the scheme. Yes, Chloe Vance, Liam's stepsister, the one who would be entangled with him for a lifetime. Ilara, are you out of your mind? Diana shouted, growing more frantic at my silence. Chloe already agreed. As long as you give her the job, she promised to date your brother. Now you're backing out? Do you want Mark to stay single his whole life? How can you be so heartless? I let out a bitter laugh. So that was it. The full picture. Using my job, my father's legacy, as a bargaining chip to secure a wife for her lazy, useless son. No wonder in my past life she had praised Liam to the skies and pushed us together. No wonder Chloe, who clearly looked down on Mark, had ended up pinching her nose and marrying him. The root of it all was right here in this cramped living room. Seeing my resolve, Liam's anger suddenly eased. He took a deep breath as though suppressing something, and his voice softened unexpectedly, adopting that all-too-familiar tone of false concern that had once made me so pliable. Ilara, don't throw a tantrum. He even tried to force a gentle smile, though it was stiff and unnatural on his face. I know you're upset. Blame me for not discussing the job with you beforehand. But Chloe is my sister. Isn't it only right to help her out? We're family. Family should support each other. His words slithered toward me, sticky with false temptation. We can talk more about the job later. Let's just get the certificate first so we don't make a scene in front of everyone. In my past life, this exact manner, words that sounded caring but were nothing more than manipulation, had kept me firmly under his control. Like boiling a frog slowly in warm water, he had told me he loved me while systematically trapping me at home, pretending to care while carrying on with Chloe. I remembered one time coming home to grab money for groceries and catching them standing too close in my kitchen, smiling at each other with an intimacy that screamed of secrets. His explanation then had been just as dismissive. Ilara, don't overthink it. Chloe just came by to pick something up. She's my sister. Don't imagine things. Thinking back on it now made me sick to my stomach. My foolishness, my blind trust, had become the soil for their betrayal. I glared at him, the last vestiges of my old self burning away in the fire of my renewed hatred. Liam Vance, stop with your act. I'll say it one last time. The job is mine. Since your conditions can't be met, there's no reason for us to get married. I pointed to the doorway, my arms steady, my voice clear. Please leave. The mask of gentleness on Liam's face shattered completely. He stared at me in utter disbelief, as if he had never imagined that I, the one who had always obeyed him, would dare say such words. Diana was dumbstruck, her mouth hanging open but no sound coming out. I was too disgusted to look at their twisted expressions any longer. I strode straight to the front door and yanked it open. Sure enough, several neighbors were crowded outside, craning their necks. The argument inside had clearly drawn their attention. Faces full of curiosity and gossip turned toward me. But the moment I stepped out, their expressions shifted into concern. Mrs. Albright, who lived directly across the hall, was the first to speak. Ilara, what happened? Why are you and Liam quarreling in broad daylight? Mrs. Gable chimed in. That's right. If there's something to say, talk it through. Weren't you supposed to register the marriage today? Go on quickly before the offices close. I swept my eyes over Liam's dark, stormy face and Diana's guilty, evasive gaze. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly inside and out. Nothing much, I said, the picture of calm. Just that someone wants to steal the job my father gave his life for. My words dropped like a stone into still water. The neighbors' expressions froze instantly. Steal your job? Mrs. Albright pressed, her brow furrowed with concern. I lifted my hand and pointed into the house at Diana. My stepmother, Diana Reed. She wants me to give my job to Liam Vance's stepsister, Chloe Vance. I paused for effect, letting the names sink in. She said Chloe needs it as part of her dowry if she's to marry her son Mark. As soon as those words left my mouth, the neighbors' eyes turned toward Diana, full of shock, confusion, and a dawning hint of contempt. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the neighbors. Diana's face, which had been flushed with anger, drained of all color, leaving a pasty, panicked mask. She stammered, her words tripping over each other. No. Ilara, you've misunderstood. It's not like that at all. Misunderstood. I cut her off, my voice ringing with a clarity that silenced her sputtering. How long has it been since my father sacrificed his life? The factory arranged this job for me, his daughter. And you already want me to hand it over to Chloe? You even teamed up with Liam Vance. One wants the job. The other uses marriage as a cover. Who do you think you're fooling? The words spilled out of me fast and sharp, a barrage of truth aimed directly at their carefully constructed lies. Liam's face turned a mottled purple. He stepped forward, his gentlemanly facade crumbling as he reached for my arm, his intention to silence me clear. "Elara, what nonsense are you spouting?" he growled, his voice low and threatening. I violently shook off his hand and backed away, putting a safe distance between us, my eyes brimming with a disgust I no longer had to hide. "Nonsense, Liam Vance? In the past I was blind, fooled by your sweet words, thinking you truly cared about me. That's the only reason I agreed to be with you. But now it's clear you only have that good sister of yours, Chloe Vance, in your heart." I deliberately emphasized the word sister, loading it with all the insinuation it deserved. "For her sake you wanted me to hand over my job. You even used our marriage as part of your scheme. How devoted of you." I let a cold, mocking smile touch my lips. "Since you're so wholeheartedly concerned about Chloe, even to the point of sacrificing your own marriage, then let me tell you this. I, Elara Reed, am not someone who clings desperately. I won't marry you. Go to your good sister instead." When those words left my mouth, the entire hallway fell into a stunned silence. The only sound was the neighbors' shocked gasps. Liam Vance, the proud, permanent worker, had probably never suffered such public humiliation. He was trembling with a rage so pure it seemed to vibrate the air around him. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice a strangled whisper. You're completely unreasonable." Diana's knees seemed to give way and she stumbled against the doorframe, her lips moving soundlessly. The carefully constructed narrative of the benevolent stepmother and the generous fiancé had been utterly demolished in under a minute. The silence lasted only a few seconds before Mrs. Albright was the first to react. She frowned at Diana, her voice laced with stern disapproval. "Oh, Diana Reed, what you're doing is really disgraceful." She shook her head, her gaze sweeping over the other neighbors, gathering their silent agreement. "Elara's father hasn't been gone that long, and already you're scheming for the job he gave his life for. What will the neighbors think?" Mr. Gable's face hardened into a grim mask. "That job is government compensation for a martyr's family. It's clearly regulated. How could you just hand it over to outsiders?" He turned his stern gaze to Liam. "And Liam, you're a grown man, a respected worker. Why are you mixed up in this? It's outrageous." Another neighbor, Mrs. Chin, couldn't hold back either. "Elara's such a good girl, hardworking and filial. Liam, how could you scheme against your own fiancé like this? All for your stepsister? Where's your conscience?" She sniffed, her eyes narrowing. "Honestly, I think there's more going on here. You claim it's just for your stepsister, but I say you've been involved with her all along." Diana's face flushed red, then pale again. She wanted to argue, to scream and deny, but the wall of accusatory faces and the weight of their contempt robbed her of words. I really didn't," was all she could manage, a weak, pathetic whisper. Liam, on the other hand, was completely furious, but the neighbors' voices came at him one after another, a chorus of moral judgment that left him speechless. He could only glare at me, his eyes so full of rage it seemed he wanted to devour me whole. But this was nothing compared to the pain I had endured in my past life. The public shame he felt now was a mere pinprick to the years of private agony I had suffered. Just then the crowd at the door stirred as a rough, familiar male voice barked, "Move! Get the hell out of the way!" The neighbors were shoved aside roughly, and storming in with a dark expression was none other than my worthless stepbrother, Mark. And trailing behind him like a pale, delicate shadow, was the so-called White Lotus herself, Chloe Vance. Her eyes were red and watery, her whole appearance meticulously crafted to paint the image of a pitiful victim wronged by a cruel world. The moment Mark saw the scene inside, his gaze locked onto me. In a few aggressive strides he was right in front of me, his eyes bulging with fury. "Elara Reed, what nonsense are you spewing this time?" He raised his large meaty hand, ready to slap me across the face for my insubordination. I instinctively stepped back, but before his hand could land, the neighbors erupted in my defense. "Hey Mark, what are you doing?" Mrs. Albright grabbed his raised arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "If you have something to say, then say it. How could you raise your hand to hit her?" Mr. Gable roared angrily, stepping in front of me like a human shield. In broad daylight, bullying Alara like this. What kind of man are you? What kind of brother does that? The neighbors shouted one after another, surrounding Mark and holding him back tightly. His neck turned red with rage, veins bulging on his forehead, but he couldn't break free from the wall of righteous civilians. He could only roar at me from behind them, spittle flying from his lips. Stop trying to stir up trouble. Stop ruining my mother's and Chloe's reputations. You just don't want to give Chloe the job, so you're making excuses. Behind him, shielded by his bulk, Chloe played her part perfectly. She tugged gently at his sleeve, lowering her head as tears fell like broken beads. Mark, stop. Don't say any more. Then she lifted her tear-streaked face to me, her voice a trembling, fragile thing. Alara, I know you don't like me, but how can you accuse me and Liam like that? She wept as she spoke, all the while sneaking glances at Liam from the corner of her eyes, testing his reaction. Her pitiful, fragile act was perfected to the finest detail. Sure enough, Liam's heart softened instantly. The anger and embarrassment he had just felt from being surrounded by the neighbors vanished, replaced by a protective fervor for his persecuted sister. He rushed forward, pulled Chloe into his arms and gently patted her back. Chloe, don't cry. I'm here. This isn't your fault, he murmured softly to her, his voice tender with a comfort he had never once offered me. Yet when his eyes turned toward me, they carried only reproach and impatience, as though I was the one being unreasonable, malicious, and cruel. Watching their little performance of brother-sister affection, I nearly laughed out loud. What a shameless pair. Holding my arms across my chest, I waited until Chloe's sobs quieted slightly before speaking, my voice slow and deliberate, dripping with sarcasm. Well, Liam Vance, you certainly treat your dear stepsister well. Look at her crying like pear blossoms in the rain, and you're so heartbroken for her. Weren't you just trying to help her take my job a moment ago? I curled my lips into a cold smile. You know what? Don't waste your energy trying to snatch my job. Since you care for Chloe so much and think so highly of her, why don't you give her your job instead? You're a permanent worker at the factory, aren't you? I hear you're about to be promoted to team leader. What a bright future. If you handed your position to your beloved sister, wouldn't that prove your devotion even more? The moment I finished speaking, a profound silence fell both inside and outside the house. Liam's arms around Chloe went rigid. Chloe's sobs stopped abruptly, and she lifted her tear-streaked face to look at me in disbelief, as though I had just suggested they set themselves on fire. Diana finally lost control. She jerked free from the neighbors holding her back and exploded like a firecracker. Alara Reed, you wicked girl. What are you plotting? She shrieked, jabbing her finger at my face, spittle flying. The job was left to you by your father. Why should Liam give up his? I can see you just can't stand to see Chloe doing well. You cursed creature. You killed your parents and now you want to ruin our whole family. Her venomous curses were unbearable to hear, but before I could respond, Mark, already red-eyed with rage, snapped completely. The fury he'd been holding back under the neighbor's restraint found a new violent outlet. Bitch, I'll kill you, he roared. With a surge of brute strength, he broke free from Mrs. Albright and the others and charged at me like a mad bull. The neighbors cried out, trying to block him. But this time Mark was determined. He shoved Mr. Gable aside. The older man stumbled back with a grunt. Mark lifted his leg and kicked me hard in the stomach. A sharp, tearing pain exploded in my abdomen. A choked groan escaped my lips as the air was forced from my lungs. My vision went black, dotted with white stars, and my body crumpled backward uncontrollably, hitting the hard floor with a sickening thud. He hit her. Mark hit Alara. Stop him. Hurry. The neighbors' voices erupted into a chaos of shouts and screams. Some rushed to restrain the still roaring Mark, while others knelt anxiously beside me, their faces blurry above me, voices filled with concern. Amid the turmoil, I heard Mrs. Albright's sharp, tearful voice cutting through the noise. Call the police. Hurry. Call the police. Curled on the cold, hard floor, drenched in cold sweat from the blinding pain, I felt more awake and clear-headed than ever. This violence, this utter disregard for me was their true nature. And I would make sure they paid for it in this life with everything they had. The world was a blur of pain and shouting. Through a haze I saw Mark, his face a grotesque mask of fury, being wrestled to the ground by Mr. Gable and two other men from the building. His roars were now muffled, choked with rage and the pressure of a knee on his back. Diana was wailing, a high, theatrical sound, but the neighbors ignored her, their attention split between the violent spectacle of her son and my motionless form on the floor. Liam and Chloe were a frozen tableau of shock. Liam's arms had dropped from around Chloe and he stood staring at me, his expression a conflicted mess of horror and, was that annoyance? As if my getting assaulted was a personal inconvenience to him. Chloe had her hands clapped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a genuine, for once, fear. Elara, can you hear me? Mrs. Albright's face swam into view, her hands gently patting my cheek. The pain in my stomach was a deep, throbbing fire, but the cold clarity in my mind was sharper than any physical sensation. This was a gift. Mark had just handed me everything I needed on a silver platter. I'm okay, I managed to whisper, letting my voice tremble with a weakness I didn't entirely feel. It was crucial to be the victim, the martyr's daughter, brutally attacked in her own home. The sound of authoritative footsteps and sharp voices cut through the domestic chaos. "All right, what's going on here? Move aside, please." The crowd at the door parted and two uniformed police officers stepped into the cramped apartment. Their eyes took in the scene with practiced swiftness. Me on the floor, surrounded by concerned women, Mark pinned down, still struggling, Diana sobbing hysterically, and Liam and Chloe standing stiffly by, looking guilty by association. When their gazes landed on me, a young woman curled in pain on the cold cement, their faces hardened. "What happened here?" the older officer demanded, his voice leaving no room for evasion. The neighbors all began speaking at once, a chorus of angry voices painting a clear picture for the law. "He kicked her. That one, Mark. He just charged at her and kicked her in the stomach. She was just defending her father's job and they all ganged up on her. Her stepmother and that fiancé of hers were trying to steal her job, officer. The one her martyr father left her." The officers barely paid attention to Diana's escalating curses and wails. Their focus was on the facts, and the facts were undeniable. After a few brief, sharp questions directed at Mrs. Albright and Mr. Gable, they quickly made their decision. "Right," the older officer said. "First, get the injured to the hospital. You two," he pointed to his partner and then to the men restraining Mark, "bring him. Everyone else involved, you will come with us to the station to give statements." Two kind neighbors, Mrs. Chin and a young woman from downstairs, carefully helped me to my feet. A sharp gasp of pain escaped me as I straightened, and I wasn't faking it. The kick had been vicious. As we shuffled past Mark, who was now in handcuffs, he was still glaring at me with eyes full of pure venom, as if he wanted to tear me apart alive. I met his gaze, and for just a fraction of a second, I let the mask of pain slip. I tugged weakly at the corner of my lips and gave him a frail yet utterly mocking smile. His confusion was instantaneous, followed by a dawning, bewildered rage. He didn't understand. He couldn't comprehend that the mouse he was used to kicking had grown teeth and a plan. At the hospital, the doctor was thorough. He poked and prodded my abdomen, making me wince. "Significant bruising," he announced. "Soft tissue damage. It's going to be very painful for a while, but thankfully no internal bleeding or broken ribs. Not particularly serious, but we'll keep you for observation overnight." I nodded meekly, accepting the diagnosis. It was perfect. Serious enough to warrant legal consequences, but not life-threatening. I was given a bed in a shared ward, and the sharp antiseptic smell was oddly comforting. It was the smell of survival. Before long, Mrs. Albright and Mr. Gable arrived, their faces a mixture of anger and satisfaction. "Elara, don't you worry," Mrs. Albright said, pulling up a chair and sitting firmly by my bed. "The officers have investigated everything clearly. There's solid evidence that Mark deliberately injured you. He's been formally detained." A wave of cold triumph washed over me. One down. That afternoon, a different visitor arrived. Diana. Her face was a roadmap of weariness and fear, her eyes swollen and red from what were probably real self-pitying tears. She carried a cheap net bag filled with a few sad-looking apples and tangerines. The performance was about to begin. As soon as she entered the ward, she set the fruit on the bedside table with a sigh, rubbing her hands together, looking like she wanted to speak but didn't know how to begin. I leaned against the headboard, watching her coldly, saying nothing. She forced a smile that was uglier than a cry. Elara, are you all right? What did the doctor say? I continued to stare, my silence a weapon. Her smile grew stiff. Elara, I know your brother was wrong. The word, brother, stuck in my craw. He lost his temper. But it was just a moment of foolishness. Please, you're the bigger person. Just forgive him this once. Let me apologize to you. Will that do? As she spoke, fresh tears streamed down her face. If your brother really gets locked up, his whole life will be ruined. Have pity on your mom. Please talk to the officers. Write a letter of forgiveness, won't you? Her wrinkled, desperate face strained to appear sincere, and her swollen red eyes released tears at just the right moment. For a second I was thrown back into my previous life. The memory was a ghost that chilled my blood. My father had just passed away and I was drowning in a grief so profound I could barely function. Yet Diana had spent her days whispering with Liam's family. Then Liam had come to me, standing there with a face full of supposed concern. Elara, he had said, your father's job was left for you, but you're a girl. Working at the factory will be too hard for you. How about this? You give the job to Chloe. Once she's settled in at work, I'll go with you to register our marriage. His tone had been so natural, as if he were granting me a great favor. And I, so incredibly foolish then, intoxicated by so-called love and empty promises, had actually believed him. I had personally gone to transfer the job, handing over my father's hard-earned iron rice bowl to Chloe Vance. I had thought happiness was finally beginning. But reality had struck me like a slap in the face. Only days after the job was transferred to Chloe's name, Diana and Mark had shown their true colors. Claiming the house was too small and that Mark needed it for his marriage, they had forcibly seized the home my parents left me, throwing all my belongings out onto the street. I was homeless with nowhere to go but to Liam. To be fair, he did keep his promise and went with me to register the marriage. But that was all. No bride price, no wedding, not even an announcement to family or friends. I married into the Vance family like a thief in the night, unseen and unheard. What awaited me was not a husband's love, but endless toil and humiliation. I became a servant, caring for his paralyzed mother and taking on every bit of housework. And Liam? He was utterly cold to me. For 2 whole years after our marriage, Liam Vance didn't so much as touch a single finger of mine. At night we slept in separate rooms. I was nothing more than a free maid, not his wife. Later I finally realized the truth. He wasn't incapable. He was keeping himself pure for Chloe Vance. How laughable. How utterly ironic. And Chloe, the one who took my job, she enjoyed that respectable position and all the prestige that came with it. She married Mark, but their marriage was nothing more than a farce. In less than 2 years the two of them were fighting constantly and they divorced. After the divorce, Chloe, like a wounded bird, flew back to the Vance household and began showing up around Liam even more often. They carried on right under my nose, inside what was supposed to be my home, exchanging flirtatious looks and acting like lovers, while I had no choice but to endure it in silence. That life, a life of silent despair, of being a ghost in my own home, I would never live again, not even for one more day. So now, Reborn, how could I possibly be moved by Diana's crocodile tears? Her sadness looked so cheap, so transactional. I curled my lips and said coldly, "You want a letter of forgiveness?" She froze, then looked up at me with a flicker of surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to give in so easily. Quickly she nodded, bobbing her head like a chicken pecking rice. Yes, Elara, I knew you were a good child. You wouldn't abandon your brother. Of course you'll help. Her eyes lit up instantly, full of a greedy, premature hope. I slowly raised one finger, my gaze unwavering. First, you and your son Mark will get out of the house my father left behind. That was my parents' home. It has nothing to do with you or your son. The smile on Diana's face froze solid. I raised a second finger. Second, compensation. Medical bills, lost wages, emotional damages. Mark's kick nearly tore my insides apart. That debt must be settled clearly. I let my words hang in the sterile air. Both conditions are non-negotiable. If you meet them, I'll write the letter at once. I paused deliberately, watching her face transform from hope to dark, seething fury. A rush of pure satisfaction surged through me. If you don't, I finished, my voice dropping to a whisper, then let your precious son stay inside. However long they sentence him, he'll stay. A few years in prison might finally teach him a lesson. Diana Johnson's mask finally shattered. The sorrowful, pleading expression vanished, twisting into the raw, vicious anger I knew so well. She leapt to her feet, jabbing a finger at my nose. "Elara Reed, you heartless, ungrateful brat. How long has it been since your father died and you treat us like this? We worked ourselves to the bone raising you, and this is how you repay us." Her body shook with rage, her voice sharp and shrill. "I'll tell you, that house is partly mine too, and Mark is your brother. So much for apologies and regret. They had been nothing but lies. And here it was, her true face, exactly the same as in my previous life." Diana cursed viciously, spittle flying, and when she saw that I remained utterly unmoved, she seemed to snap completely. She snatched up the cheap net bag of fruit from the bedside table and sneered. "Ungrateful brat. Even a dog wouldn't eat this fruit if I fed it to one." She shot me one last vicious glare before turning and storming out of the ward, the door swinging shut behind her with a definitive bang. The net bag swung in her hand, the few withered apples and oranges inside seeming to mock the farce that had just played out. I let out a long, slow breath. Arguing with people like that was nothing but a waste of words. Still, it was better this way. Now that the pretense had been ripped apart, there was no need to keep up the false peace. Diana and Mark had to get out of my home. That apartment was the only thing my parents left me, and I would never allow them to take it over like cuckoos in another bird's nest. As for compensation, that kick Mark gave me would not be endured for nothing. I leaned slowly back against the headboard. The afternoon sunshine spilled warmly through the window, painting a bright square on the white hospital floor. But my mind was racing, cold and clear. What should I do next? First was the job. I had to hold tightly onto the position my father left me and never let Chloe Vance, that vile woman, take it again. Second was the house. Once Diana and Mark were forced out, I needed to find a way to get the property deed completely into my name. And then there was Liam Vance. Just the thought of his name made my gaze grow cold. I hadn't even begun to settle the score with him. None of them would escape. The hospital's relative peace was short-lived. Before I was even discharged, the trio appeared, a united front of desperation blocking the doorway of my room. Diana, Liam, and Chloe stood there, each wearing a carefully curated expression. Diana had plastered on a fawning smile, though the calculation in her eyes was as sharp as ever. Chloe kept her head lowered, the picture of burdened innocence, her shoulders trembling with manufactured grief. And Liam? He looked at me with a complicated expression, a trace of performative guilt but mostly false urgency. He was the one to step forward first, the designated negotiator. "Elara, are you feeling better?" His voice was a practiced gentle tone, laced with that same insincere concern that had once been my undoing. I couldn't be bothered to answer. My gaze slid past him to land coldly on Diana. So she had brought her reinforcements. She thought Liam's presence would soften me. Liam, seeing my silence, continued his little act. "Elara, I know you're still angry with me. What happened last time was my fault. I shouldn't have gotten so close to Chloe." He brushed off their filth as though it were a minor social misstep. "But Elara, you have to believe me. The one I truly love has always been you." He said it while avoiding my gaze, his eyes drifting toward the window. "Once you recover, we'll go register our marriage." I almost laughed out loud. Now, after all this, he still thought he could dangle marriage like a carrot. His brain must have been slammed in a door. Before I could voice the scathing retort on my tongue, he shifted tactics, his tone turning earnest as if appealing to my better nature. "But Elara, your mother and your brother have had a hard time too. Your brother only acted on impulse. We're all one family. There's no need to be so ruthless." He had the gall to look at me with a hint of reproach. "People will talk, and it won't be good for your reputation either." Before I could open my mouth, Chloe began her performance. She suddenly started sobbing, raising her tear-streaked face. The tears poured down like a broken string of pearls, a masterpiece of calculated misery. "Elara, please," she choked out, "just forgive your brother. If he really goes to prison, what will happen to your mother and me?" She clasped her hands together as if in prayer. "I know you don't like me, but one day I'll be your sister-in-law. Can't you show mercy just this once?" The moment those words slipped from her lips, Liam's expression shifted ever so slightly, a flicker of discomfort, but he didn't refute her. And Chloe carried right on as if she hadn't noticed at all. "We can't get married without a house. Chloe continued, her voice a pitiful wail. Elara, please have a kind heart and write a letter of forgiveness for your brother. All right. As she spoke, she kept sneaking cautious glances at my expression, and in the depths of her eyes, there was a faint, hidden greed, a belief that this performance might actually work. This family. Unbelievable. Their shamelessness was thicker than city walls. One played the soft role, one the hard role, and another pretended to be a devoted lover. Too bad their little act no longer worked on me. I drew in a deep, slow breath, suppressing the storm of contempt and anger in my chest, and pulled a cold, deliberate smile onto my face. You want a letter of forgiveness? Immediately, Diana's and Chloe's eyes lit up with a predatory hope. Liam's face filled with expectation, a smug certainty returning to his features. He thought he had won. I spoke slowly, dragging out each word, watching their hope grow with a sense of dark satisfaction. If you want a house for marriage, fine. If you want me to write a letter to get Mark released, fine too. Their surprise blossomed into barely contained joy. Diana actually took a step forward, her hand outstretched as if expecting me to hand over the letter then and there. Then my tone shifted sharply, turning to ice. The house will be sold to you at market price. Not a penny less. I watched their smiles vanish. In addition, Mark injured me. Medical expenses, lost wages, emotional damages. All of it must be compensated. 100,000. In cash. Once the money is in my hand and the house sale is legally finalized, you will have your letter. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Diana's face went from hopeful to purpled rage in a second. 100,000. Are you insane? That's extortion, she shrieked, her voice cracking. Chloe's tears dried up instantly, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. You vicious creature. But it was Liam's reaction that was the most satisfying. The mask of the reasonable, caring fiancé finally cracked, anger twisting his handsome features into something ugly. Elara Reed, he roared, taking a menacing step toward my bed. What kind of attitude is this? You weren't like this before. You used to listen to everything I said. His fingers shook as he pointed at me, trembling from a mixture of rage and bewildered frustration. How did you turn into this? You don't even give me a shred of face anymore. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it took my breath away. He and his stepsister had colluded to steal my father's job. He had stood by while his supposed future brother-in-law assaulted me, and he still wanted me to preserve his dignity? What a joke. Yet he looked at me as though I were the one betraying him. If you keep being so ungrateful, he added, his voice heavy with condescension and a pathetic attempt at threat, then forget about marriage. He actually said it. He still thought this was the ultimate weapon to control me, that I would humble myself and beg for the scraps of affection he pretended to give. A scornful, humorless laugh escaped me. It was a harsh sound in the quiet room. Marriage, Liam Vance? I said, my voice dripping with a disdain I had carried for a lifetime. Do you even deserve it? I was done. I couldn't be bothered to waste another word on these people. Get out, I said, my voice flat and final. All of you, get out. Liam's face went deathly pale, then flushed a deep, humiliated crimson. He had probably never imagined I would ever speak to him in such a tone, let alone dismiss him like a piece of garbage. Diana trembled with incoherent anger, no doubt terrified I'd bring up the compensation again. Chloe shot me one last venomous look before grabbing the fuming Liam's arm and dragging him out, with a sputtering Diana following in their wake. All three of them slinked away in utter disgrace. The silence they left behind was blissful. A couple of days later, the police returned for a routine follow-up on Mark's assault case. The same older officer stood by my bed, his notebook in hand. Miss Reed, regarding your stepbrother Mark Johnson's case, are you willing to provide a letter of forgiveness? I will not, I said, my voice firm and clear. From the moment this happened until now, his family hasn't shown a shred of genuine remorse. All they've thought about is how to escape punishment and how to keep scheming for what's mine. I looked the officer directly in the eye. The evidence of Mark assaulting me is ironclad. He must pay for what he did. The officer looked at me, a flicker of respect in his gaze, and gave a slight nod as he noted something down in his record book. All right, we've noted your statement. I knew Diana and her brood would have loved to use me as a way to get Mark out, But now that path was completely cut off. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. One battle won. What I didn't expect was that they still had another trick up their sleeves, one so shameless it was almost unbelievable. Their desperation was making them reckless. It was thanks to my kind neighbors that I heard the news first. Mrs. Albright rushed into my hospital room, her face flushed with outrage. "Elara, something's happened," she gasped out of breath. "Liam Vance went to the factory with his stepsister. He brought some kind of agreement saying you voluntarily gave up your job and handed it over to Chloe Vance. And there's even your signature on it." My blood ran cold, then instantly boiled. They had actually forged my name. They were trying to steal my father's job right from under me. "And your stepmother went too," Mr. Gable added, having followed Mrs. Albright in, his face red with fury. "She's making a scene at the personnel office, crying and carrying on, accusing you of being ungrateful and throwing her and her son out of the house. She's saying your job was supposed to belong to her son, that he's also the child of a martyr, and that you stole it from him." The sheer, breathtaking gall of it left me speechless for a moment. They were rewriting history in real time, painting themselves as the victims. "Elara, you've got to act fast," Mrs. Albright said, wringing her hands anxiously. "You must stop them right away. Once that paperwork is stamped, it's over." He was right. Panic threatened to rise, but I forced it down. I had one card left to play, a card I had been hoping to save for a more dignified moment. But dignity was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I immediately asked Mrs. Albright to help me to the nurse's station. I needed to make a phone call. I picked up the heavy receiver, my fingers dialing a number I hadn't called in years, a number the old director had given me himself, telling me to use it if I was ever in real trouble. Back when my father's job had been assigned, it was the old director himself who had approved it. He had watched me grow up and had been a close friend of my father. The current director was once his apprentice. He had told me back then that if I ever had difficulties I should go to him. The call connected quickly. "Hello? Who is this?" came a voice, aged but still full of vigor and authority. "Old director," I said, my voice tight with the urgency of the situation. "This is Elara Reed. David Reed's daughter." "Elara." The voice on the other end of the line was silent for a second, then sharpened with immediate concern. "Girl, what's wrong? You sound upset." "Old director, I need your help," I said, the words tumbling out as I quickly explained everything. I told him about Liam and Diana's scheme about Mark's assault, and now about the forged document and the scene they were causing at the factory to steal my job. I didn't embellish, the truth was damning enough. They're at the personnel office right now, trying to force the transfer with a paper that has a fake version of my signature on it. The line went quiet for a few moments. I could almost picture him on the other end, his bushy eyebrows drawing together, his kind face hardening. Then came a sharp, explosive slam of a palm on a desk that was so loud it made the receiver vibrate against my ear. "Outrageous!" The old director's furious roar thundered through the line. "Absolutely outrageous! Such nonsense! Bullying a widow and her daughter? Daring to bully the family of a martyr? They've gone too far." His anger was a tangible force, a wave of righteous indignation that filled me with a fierce, grateful hope. "Don't worry, girl," he boomed, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "Stay right where you are. I'll come to you right away." True to his word, less than half an hour later, the door to my hospital room flew open. A short, stocky elderly man in a faded Mao suit, his hair a shock of white but his posture ramrod straight, stormed in. It was old Director Zhang. His driver, a young man with a grim expression, trailed behind him. When the old director saw me, pale and leaning against the pillows in my hospital gown, the fire in his eyes burned even hotter. He strode to my bedside, his gaze sweeping over me, taking in the visible signs of my ordeal. "Don't be afraid, girl," he said, his voice a low, powerful rumble. "Your grandfather is here." He used the term of endearment he'd always used when I was a child. He spun on his heel, his decision made. "Come, we're going to the factory. I want to see who dares bully a martyr's family so brazenly." He didn't wait for a reply. His driver hurried to help me out of bed and into a wheelchair, despite my weak protests that I could walk. The old director was a force of nature, and when he moved, everyone moved with him. On the way to the factory, sitting in the back of the old director's black car, he was silent, his face a dark thundercloud. He said nothing, but the air in the car was thick with his simmering fury. The car, however, didn't go straight to the factory gates. Instead, it pulled up sharply in front of the local police station. The old director got out himself. "Wait here," he commanded and strode inside. He emerged barely 10 minutes later, his expression, if possible, even grimmer. He didn't say what he'd done, but I knew. He had filed a report. Forgery and fraud. This could never be tolerated. He was building an ironclad case, and he was doing it with the full weight of his reputation. Finally, the car pulled up at the familiar soot-stained gates of the mechanical factory. The old director led our small procession, me in the wheelchair pushed by the driver, with a confidence that parted the sea of workers on their lunch break. He ignored the stares and whispers, striding straight toward the administration building and the personnel office. Just as we reached the closed door of the office, I heard it. Chloe Vance's sweet, delicate voice, dripping with false modesty from inside. "Thank you so much, Director. I'll definitely work hard from now on and live up to the factory's trust." It was followed immediately by Liam Carter's sycophantic laughter. "Yes, thank you for understanding the situation." The old director's face grew even darker, a promise of the storm about to break. He didn't bother to knock. He raised a hand and shoved the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. The scene inside froze instantly like a photograph of guilt. The head of personnel, a man named Mr. Fong, was smiling broadly as he handed a freshly stamped document to Chloe. She was reaching out to take it, her face lit with unhidden excitement and pride. Liam stood beside her, chest slightly puffed out, wearing the smug expression of a petty man who believed he had finally triumphed. And on the desk between them lay the damning evidence. That so-called voluntary transfer agreement, my forged name glaring from the page like an open, bleeding wound. The three people inside froze the moment we burst into the office. Mr. Feng's smile stiffened and then melted into sheer panic. Chloe's expression turned to stone, her outstretched hand hovering uselessly in the air. And Liam Carter, when he realized it was me, and especially when he saw the old director at my side with fury blazing in his eyes, lost every trace of color in his face. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. His eyes widened, his mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and a strangled, gurgling noise came from his throat. Beads of cold sweat broke out across his forehead and upper lip. He instinctively took a step back, his gaze darting around the room like a trapped animal, looking for an escape that didn't exist. He didn't dare meet my eyes, let alone the murderous glare of the old director. The old director's sharp gaze swept over him as though he were nothing but a piece of trash on the sole of his shoe. Then he turned his terrifying attention to the trembling, panicked Mr. Fong. "Go," the old director commanded, his voice like cracking ice. "Call the factory director. Now." Mr. Fong jolted as if pardoned from a death sentence. He didn't even dare glance at Liam or Chloe, scrambling out of the office in a near panic, almost tripping over his own feet. Chloe's face went ashen. Her earlier pride vanished without a trace, leaving only sheer, unadulterated terror. She cast a desperate, pleading look at Liam, but Liam himself was barely standing, far too rattled to offer her any support or comfort. The office fell into a deathly silence, broken only by the heavy, furious breathing of the old director, each breath a drumbeat of impending doom against everyone's chest. Before long, hurried, authoritative footsteps echoed in the hall. A middle-aged man in his 40s, dressed in blue factory overalls but radiating an air of command, strode quickly into the room. It was Director Wong, the current factory head and the old director's former protégé. The moment Director Wong saw his mentor's storm-dark face and me in the wheelchair, his own face fell. "Master," he greeted respectfully, his voice tight with apprehension. "What brings you here? And Alara too." He looked at me with genuine concern. "What happened to you?" The old director didn't answer directly. He simply lifted his chin, a sharp, dismissive gesture, first toward Liam Carter, who was trembling like a leaf, and then toward the damning document still lying on the desk. Director Wong only needed a glance. One look at the forged agreement, another at the guilty, petrified faces of Liam and Chloe, and he understood everything immediately. His own face darkened with a mix of fury and profound embarrassment. Finally, the old director spoke, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that was more frightening than any shout. Wang Hai, he said, using the director's given name like a schoolmaster addressing a failing student. Look at the kind of people you've trained. Look at what your factory has become. He slammed a palm down on the desk, making the forged agreement jump. Is this what passes for your so-called talent? Forging documents? Deceiving superiors? Conspiring to steal the job and property of a martyr's family? His voice rose with each question, scalding the air in the room. Audacious. Absolutely audacious. When did our factory become a cesspool for filth like this? Do people like this deserve to work here? Sweat broke out on Director Wang's forehead. The old director's authority in the factory was legendary, and his anger was more terrifying than any official reprimand. And this matter itself crossed every conceivable bottom line. Director Wang spun toward Liam, his eyes now sharp as knives, brimming with a fury born of personal betrayal. Liam Carter, he said, his voice cold enough to freeze hell. You've disappointed me beyond words. The factory invested in you, nurtured you, and for what? Not for honest work, but for underhanded schemes that disgrace us all. He didn't even let Liam try to speak. With your vile character and corrupt morals, we cannot keep you here. From this moment you are expelled. Get out of the mechanical factory at once. Liam jerked his head up, his eyes wide with utter disbelief and horror. No, Director, I was wrong. He stammered incoherently, desperate to explain, to lie, to do anything to save himself. Too late, Director Wang cut him off, his voice final. He then turned his blistering glare on Chloe Vance, who stood pale and trembling, looking like she might be sick. And you, Chloe? So young yet so vicious, so eager to steal another's livelihood. Lawless. Shameless. Before he could finish, steady, purposeful footsteps echoed from the doorway. 2 uniformed officers walked in, the same ones the old director had summoned from the station earlier. The older officer nodded grimly at old Director Zhang and Director Wang. Comrade officers, the old director said, his voice stern and unwavering. They forged the signature of Martyr's daughter, Alara Reed, in an attempt to defraud the factory of a work position. We have both the evidence and the witnesses. Director Wang immediately added, his voice firm, their actions are vile in the extreme. Please, comrades, take them away and handle this according to the law. The officers stepped forward, their expressions grave. One of them addressed the 2 culprits whose legs seemed to have turned to water. Liam Carter. Chloe Vance. You'll need to come with us. Chloe collapsed to the ground, a long, piercing wail tearing from her throat. It was a sound of pure, undiluted terror. Liam, on the other hand, seemed to completely break, his body going limp like a pile of mud, all fight and pretense drained out of him. The officers had to grab him by the arms, one on each side, and half-drag him out of the office. Their cries and struggles, Chloe's wailing, Liam's choked protests, echoed down the hall as they were taken away, the sound growing fainter until it was swallowed by the normal noises of the factory. Only then did the tight, painful string that had been pulled taut in my chest finally ease, allowing me to take a full, deep breath. It was over. This part of the battle, at least, was decisively won. Director Wang turned to me, his face full of a sincere apology and concern. Alara, you've been wronged. The factory's oversight was lax, and it put you through such a fright. He sighed heavily, the weight of the incident clear on his shoulders. I shook my head, my eyes stinging not with tears of pain, but with a profound, overwhelming relief. Thank you, Director Wang. Thank you, old director. Director Wang's brow furrowed again as he remembered the final piece of the puzzle. As for your stepmother, Diana Reed. He turned to the ashen, trembling Mr. Fong, who still didn't dare to breathe too loudly. Notify the family committee immediately. Make it clear to Diana Reed that the apartment in the family housing complex was assigned to Comrade David Reed. After his sacrifice, according to regulations, his direct relative, Comrade Alara Reed, inherits the right of residence. As a stepmother, Diana has no claim after his death. She must vacate within 3 days. Then he looked back at me, his tone solemn and steady, a promise etched into his words. Alara, don't worry. The job your father left will always be yours. Once you recover, you can report to the factory anytime. Or, if you want to complete the necessary transfer procedures under policy, the factory will fully support you. I had kept the job. I had kept the house. Everything my father had given his life for, I had defended. On the day I was discharged, the sunlight outside the hospital was dazzlingly bright. I drew in a deep breath of the outside air. Even with the city smog, it smelled like freedom. 3 days after my discharge, I stood before the soot-stained gates of the mechanical factory, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a fierce, quiet triumph. I was wearing a brand new set of blue overalls, stiff with starch, and pinned proudly to my chest was a work badge I never thought I'd wear. It was simple, a small laminated card with a black and white photo and my name printed beneath it in clear, bold letters. Ilara Reed. The weight of it was more than physical. It was the weight of my father's sacrifice, my own lost lifetime of suffering, and this hard-won second chance. I touched the cool plastic, my finger tracing the letters of my name. What was mine had finally, irrevocably, come back to me. I pushed open the heavy door to my assigned workshop, and the roar of machinery hit me like a physical wave. The air was thick with the smells of cutting oil, hot metal, and ozone. A pungent industrial cocktail that, in this new life, smelled not of drudgery but of purpose. This was where my father had fought and dedicated himself. Now it was my turn. The workshop foreman, a grizzled man in his 50s named Master Luo with grease permanently etched under his fingernails, gave me a curt nod. He had been briefed, his expression a mixture of curiosity and a veteran's inherent skepticism toward any newcomer, especially one with a story. Reed, eh? He grunted not unkindly. Your father was a good man. A fine machinist. Don't tarnish his name. It was both a warning and a challenge. I won't, Master Luo, I said, my voice steady, meeting his gaze. He assigned me to start with the simplest tasks, deburring sharp edges from freshly stamped metal parts, sorting components and always watching as the seasoned workers operated the lathes and milling machines. The work was monotonous, my hands grew raw, and the noise was a constant, deafening presence. But this time I felt no resentment, no despair. Every dulled file, every greasy component, was a brick I was laying in the foundation of my own future. A future built by my own hands, not given as a poisoned gift or stolen from me. While my body learned the rhythms of the factory, my mind was already racing ahead. I couldn't spend my entire life here, a cog in the same machine, no matter how proud I was to have reclaimed my place. My father had been a hero, but I couldn't live forever in the shadow of his glory. I had to rely on myself to carve out a wider path. The day after I started work, I returned to the family housing building. The corridor was silent, the neighbors either at work or deliberately giving me space. I approached the door that had once been my prison and my purgatory. The old, familiar lock was gone. In its place was a new, sturdy brass one. I fitted the key the housing committee had given me into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I pushed the door open. The rooms were empty, the air still and smelling faintly of soap. Diana and Mark's belongings had vanished without a trace. The floors had been swept, the windows washed. Though bare, the apartment was bright and spotless, every trace of their oppressive presence scrubbed away. They were gone, completely swept out of my world. I stood in the center of the main room, the afternoon sun pouring in through the windows, warm and gentle on my face. This was the home my parents had built. This was the space my father had left me. And I, alone, had protected it. A profound, quiet peace settled over me, a feeling I hadn't known in either of my lives. That night, after a simple meal, I pulled a cardboard box out from under my bed. Inside were my high school textbooks, their pages yellowed and faintly musty. I spread them out on the small kitchen table that was now solely mine. Algebra, chemistry, Chinese literature. For 2 years I allowed myself no entertainment. My life became a strict, self-imposed routine. During the day I was Ilara the apprentice, following Master Luo through the thunderous workshop, my hands growing calloused, my mind absorbing the intricacies of gears and tolerances. At night I became Ilara the student, hunched over these books under the soft glow of a single lamp. The light in my window always burned late into the night. In the family housing compound, when other households played mahjong or gathered around their new televisions, the sounds of laughter and entertainment drifting through the warm air, none of it had anything to do with me. My world was the silent, intense struggle with quadratic equations, chemical formulas, and classical essays. Was it hard? Extremely hard. The days were long, the work physically draining, and the studying was a mental marathon after a day of manual labor. Was I tired? Exhausted? There were nights when my eyes burned and my head throbbed, and the numbers on the page blurred into meaningless symbols. But a fire in my heart, stoked by the memories of a life wasted, kept me going. I saw Liam's dismissive face, Chloe's simpering smile, Diana's greedy eyes, Mark's brutal fist. I remembered the feeling of being powerless, of being a ghost in my own home. That memory was a whip at my back, driving me forward when my body and mind begged for rest. I wanted more. I needed to see the broader world, a world where my worth wasn't tied to a job or a man, but to my own mind. The snippets of news that trickled into the factory and the compound were a grim satisfaction, a confirmation that the universe's scales were indeed balancing. It was the peak of the nationwide crackdown on crime. The cases were processed with swift, severe efficiency. William Johnson, charged with intentional injury with a politically sensitive element, attacking the daughter of a recognized martyr, was made an example of. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. The news was delivered to me officially and I received it with a silent nod. It was justice, cold and impersonal. Liam Carter and Chloe Vance, for forging official documents in an attempt to defraud a state-owned enterprise of a work position, were also punished. Though their scheme had ultimately failed, the nature of their crime was deemed serious and the impact terrible. Liam, as the primary instigator and forger, was sentenced to 1 year in a re-education through labor camp. Chloe, named as an accomplice, admitted her guilt and, with Liam taking most of the responsibility for her, received a sentence of 6 months, suspended for 1 year. But the fact that she had tried to steal a martyr's daughter's job spread throughout the entire factory district like wildfire. Her reputation, that delicate flower she had cultivated so carefully, was completely destroyed, trampled into the mud where it belonged. When I heard all this, I was in the workshop learning how to read a complex blueprint for a gear assembly from Master Luo. Inside, my heart barely rippled. There was no joy in their suffering, only a deep, settled sense of closure. Evil meets its own retribution. What goes around comes around. That was all. They were chapters in a book I had already closed. 2 years passed in this blur of disciplined effort. The calluses on my hands became permanent, the equations in my textbooks began to make profound sense, and the world within the factory walls, once so intimidating, became familiar, almost comfortable. I had earned a measure of respect from Master Luo and the others, not for my story, but for my quiet diligence and quick learning. Then came the day of the college entrance exam. I walked into the silent examination hall, my heart a calm, steady drum. I filled out the answer sheets, my pen moving with a certainty born of thousands of hours of solitary study. This was my battlefield and I was armed. Weeks later, the admission letter arrived. I tore open the thin envelope with trembling hands, my breath catching in my throat. Then I saw it. I had been accepted. Not to a local college, but to a prestigious university in the provincial capital. My major, mechanical engineering. I wept. Not out of sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming release of a wish finally, painfully achieved. I had done it. I had bent the arc of my destiny away from the grim path it was on and toward a horizon of my own choosing. Clutching the acceptance letter as if it were made of gold, I went to Director Wang's office to say goodbye. He read the letter, his stern face softening into a rare, genuine smile. "Well done, Nilara," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I hadn't expected. "If your father knew, he would be so proud." He looked out his window toward the rumbling workshop. "The gates of this factory will always remain open to you." I bowed deeply, the gesture filled with a gratitude that went beyond words. "Thank you, Director." On the day I left the mechanical factory, I carried a single suitcase. I turned back at the gates to look at the tall brick chimney one last time, its top wreathed in gray smoke against the blue sky. This place had once been my safe harbor, the legacy I had fought a war to reclaim. Now it was time for me to set sail. The provincial capital was a different world. It was a symphony of noise, color and motion that made my old factory town seem like a silent, grayscale photograph. Bicycles and buses clogged the wide streets, towering buildings cast long shadows, and the air hummed with an energy that was both terrifying and exhilarating. At the university, I was a small fish in a vast, intellectual ocean. My classmates were the best and brightest from all over the province, their confidence and easy chatter a stark contrast to my own quiet, watchful nature. My dorm room was sparse, shared with 3 other girls, but to me, it was a palace of possibilities. For the first time in either of my lives, I was anonymous. I was just Alara Reed, the student from a small city, no one's daughter, no one's fiancée, no one's victim. I threw myself into my studies in mechanical engineering with the same ferocious dedication I had applied to my late-night studying. The principles I had learned by rote on the factory floor, tolerances, material strengths, gear ratios, suddenly blossomed into elegant theories and complex mathematical models. While others struggled to visualize a stress point, I could close my eyes and see the metal flexing, hear the whine of the lathe. My hands-on experience, hard-won and once a mark of my lowly status, became my secret weapon. Life was not easy. My stipend was meager and I often survived on steamed buns and cafeteria rice, counting every coin. But the hunger in my stomach was nothing compared to the intellectual feast before me. I was ravenous for knowledge. I spent my days in lectures and labs and my nights in the vast, quiet library, the scent of old paper and ambition my constant companions. The ghosts of my past began to recede, their voices growing fainter with each new equation I mastered, each new design I drafted. Occasionally, echoes of that old life would reach me, carried on the infrequent letters from Mrs. Albright or snippets of gossip from the few acquaintances who knew someone from my old town. The news was always grim and I received it with a detached clinical interest like a biologist studying a specimen from a concluded experiment. I heard that after Liam Carter was released from his year of re-education, he was a changed man. Not reformed but broken and bitter. His reputation was in tatters, his career prospects obliterated. In a move that shocked both the Johnson and Vance families, he married Chloe. It was not a wedding of celebration, but one of bleak necessity and perhaps a twisted, shared defiance. Both families were reportedly furious, seeing the union as the final nail in the coffin of their respectability, but neither could stop them. Perhaps it was their so-called true love, forged in the fire of shared humiliation. As expected, their married life was a swift descent into acrimony. Without a stable job, Liam, too proud and lazy to endure the hardship of manual labor, scraped by on unreliable odd jobs. Chloe, her reputation permanently stained and her dreams of an easy life shattered, sat at home, her bitterness curdling into constant complaints. They quarreled endlessly, over the lack of money, over who did more or less around their shabby rented room, over long-past grudges and whose fault it really was that their lives had collapsed. The handsome man and delicate beauty, once the envy of the neighborhood, had become nothing but a pair of resentful, miserable strangers bound together by their own poor choices. The news about Diana was, if anything, even more sordid. After she was kicked out of the housing compound, her options vanished. Word spread that she had latched onto a truck driver, a man with a steady income, hoping to secure long-term support as his mistress. Unfortunately for her, the man already had a formidable wife back in his hometown. Before long, the wife, accompanied by several female relatives, stormed into Diana's rented room. The confrontation was violent and public. They tore her clothes, ripped out clumps of her hair and beat her bloody in the street, her screams drawing a crowd of onlookers. The scandal spread everywhere, a delicious piece of gossip that sealed her social fate. After that she vanished. Some said she slunk back to her distant hometown in disgrace, a broken woman. Others claimed she went even farther away, to a remote province where no one knew her name or her story. In the end, she simply disappeared from the city, erased like dust scattered by a strong wind. Hearing this, I felt a final quiet click like a lock settling into place. There was no pity in my heart for her. She had made her bed, weaving it from manipulation and greed, and had finally been forced to lie in it. These echoes of the past no longer had the power to hurt me. They were simply confirmations of a natural law, that character is destiny. Theirs had been found wanting and their lives had crumbled accordingly. My own life, once so entangled with theirs, was now on a completely different trajectory. I graduated near the top of my class. My diploma, a heavy scroll of paper, felt like a shield and a sword. With it, I was no longer just David Reed's daughter. I was engineer Alara Reed. I stayed in the provincial capital, entering a large, state-owned design institute. It was a world of drafting tables, complex calculations and blueprints for machinery that would be used across the country. The work was challenging and respected. I had my own small apartment, my own circle of friends who knew nothing of my past, my own salary that I earned with my mind. One Saturday I was walking through a bustling market, haggling cheerfully over the price of fabric for a new dress, when I saw them. It was Liam and Chloe. I stopped dead, the vibrant noise of the market fading into a dull roar in my ears. They were across the street standing by a cart selling cheap kitchenware. They looked a decade older than they were. Liam's shoulders were slumped, his once handsome face lined with resentment and defeat. His clothes were shabby and ill-fitting. Chloe beside him had a pinched, weary look. The delicate beauty that had been her currency had hardened into a permanent scowl. She was holding a cheap aluminum pot, arguing with the vendor, her voice shrill and grating. Liam stood slightly apart, ignoring her, his eyes empty. They were a picture of profound, petty misery. They never saw me. I was just another face in the crowd, a well-dressed young woman with a confident posture and a future. I was part of the world they could only look at from the outside. I turned away, the spell broken. I paid for my fabric without another word and walked on, the sun warm on my shoulders. The bitterness and sorrow of my past life, which had clung to me for so long like a stubborn stain, seemed to be washed away bit by the simple, steady current of this new one. The sun was shining. The future stretched ahead, vast and full of light. Ilara Reed had finally, completely broken free from the past and had begun living a life that truly belonged to me. The Design Institute became my new world, a realm of clean lines, precise calculations, and the quiet hum of intellectual pursuit. My small apartment, with its single window overlooking a leafy courtyard, was my sanctuary. It was sparsely furnished, but every item, the sturdy desk, the comfortable reading chair, the small vase on the table that I would fill with seasonal blooms, was chosen by me for me. It was a feeling so simple yet so profound, the unadulterated freedom of ownership. My work was fulfilling in a way the factory never could be. There I had been a pair of hands executing the designs of others. Here I was part of the mind that conceived them. I specialized in gearbox design, my hands-on experience from the factory floor giving me an intuitive understanding of how theoretical designs translated into physical working machinery. I earned the respect of my colleagues, not through a dramatic story of survival, but through quiet competence, reliability, and the occasional innovative solution to a stubborn engineering problem. Years flowed into one another, marked not by drama but by steady, quiet growth. I was promoted. I led small project teams. My salary, which I managed with the same discipline I had applied to my studies, allowed for small luxuries. New books, better food, a warmer coat for the winter. I traveled for work, visiting other cities, seeing the vast humming factories where my designs were brought to life. With each trip, the world that had once felt so small and suffocating expanded, revealing its endless possibilities. I never married. It wasn't a conscious decision born of bitterness, but a natural consequence of a life that was full and complete on its own terms. The idea of tying my existence to a man, of becoming an appendage to his life, held no appeal. I had friendships, deep and meaningful ones, with men and women who shared my interests and respected my independence. There was a gentle, kind-eyed architect I saw for a time, but when his path led toward marriage and children, and mine led toward heading a new research division, we parted ways with mutual affection and respect. There were no shattered hearts, only a calm acknowledgement of different destinies. One crisp autumn afternoon, perhaps a decade after I had last spared them a thought, I received a letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the postmark from my old hometown. It was from Mrs. Albright. Her letters had become less frequent over the years, a natural drifting as my life moved further from the one I had left behind. I opened it, expecting news of the old neighborhood, perhaps a wedding or a birth. My dear Ilara, I hope this letter finds you well and happy in the capital. You are always in our thoughts, a proud story we tell of the girl who made good. I write with some news which I felt you should hear from me rather than through the dusty channels of gossip. Liam Carter passed away last week. I paused, the paper crisp in my fingers. I felt nothing. No shock, no sorrow, not even a flicker of vindication. It was like reading a news headline about a stranger in a distant country. It was a sickness of the lungs, they say, the letter continued. He had been working in a coal yard, the only work he could get. The doctor said the coal dust didn't help. The funeral was small. Chloe was there, of course. She looks much older, they say, and has taken up with a traveling salesman. She left town with him the day after they buried Liam. It is a sad end to a story that once seemed so bright. But it confirms what I have always believed. that a life built on a crooked foundation cannot stand. You, my dear, built yours on solid rock with your father's integrity in your own two hands. We are all so proud of you. With fondness, Mrs. Albright. I folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. I walked to the window and looked out at the golden leaves drifting from the ginkgo tree in the courtyard. Liam was gone. The final, tangible connection to that other life was severed. The news was not an ending, for that story had ended for me long ago. It was merely a period on a sentence I had already stopped reading. I felt a wave of gratitude, not for his death but for my life. For the stubborn, defiant spark in my 19-year-old self that had refused to be extinguished. For the old director who had wielded his power with righteous fury. For the neighbors who had stood as a wall between me and violence. For the endless, lonely nights of study that had bought me my freedom. That evening I met two colleagues for dinner. We were celebrating the successful completion of a major project. We went to a new restaurant, one with white tablecloths and a menu I couldn't have dreamed of as a girl. We talked about work, about politics, about the new foreign films that were being shown in the city. We laughed. The sound of my own laughter, easy and unforced, was a melody I never grew tired of. Later, walking home under a canopy of brilliant stars, the cool night air on my face, I felt a profound and perfect contentment. The past was a closed book, its lessons learned, its ghosts laid to rest. The future was still unwritten, a clean page waiting for whatever I chose to inscribe upon it. The journey had been long and often painful, from the stifling living room where my fate was almost stolen, through the roaring factory, the silent hospital, the bustling university, to this quiet, confident present. I had reclaimed my name, my legacy, and my destiny. I had built a life, not in reaction to the past but in pursuit of a future. A life of my own design. A life that was truly, completely my own. The end.